The next stage that we're going to cover is the time element. And this is where history comes into place. Now if you look at the actual Quranic narrative, the Qur'an is not a history book. There are definitely historical elements in there. The Qur'an is using historical examples, but they are used in an ahistorical placing. In other words, the story of Pharaoh and Musa, it's irrelevant when it occurred. It's even irrelevant if it occurred. What is being taught is something very powerful. Right? I mean, the Quranic narrative is that it did occur, but that is not what is relevant from the story. The story is used as a teaching example to learn something of what happened in the past in order to prevent its repetition in the future. So there is definitely a historical element. Now my friend Professor Khalid Blankenship, who's at Temple, a very fine historian, told me that one of the frustrating aspects of the Qur'an as a book is that it does not allow the historian room to examine. In other words, he said that there are many examples in the Bible that we have that are historical in the sense that we can actually look at them as historians. Whereas within the Quranic narrative, the historian does not have evidence there to either negate or verify much of the Quranic narrative, or according to his opinion, any of it really. And he said it's almost a thwarting for him as a historian. Like he found it significant that it's almost like thwarting him to let him know that is not the point. That to give you a good example, in the Quranic narrative, we don't know if it's Ishmael or Isaac who is taken up on the mountain. Some of the Muslim scholars said it was Isaac, and some said it was Ishmael. Unimportant as a detail in the story, which is why the Qur'an does not mention either one by name. Although the narrative would indicate that it was Ishmael, which differs from the Jewish tradition, which is Isaac. But the point is that is not the point of the story. The point of the story is a man's being tested and fulfilling the test in the way that was most pleasing to his Lord. Now the next section here after Iman and Ihsan is to tell me about the hour. And the word in Arabic for hour is sa'a, which is related it's related to the moment. Sa'a, like I can say qama min sa'atihi, he got up immediately from his sa'a. Or I can say kam sa'a, what time is it? Like the Arabs, if they want to ask what time it is, they say kam sa'a. So I can ask what time is it? Or I can say it's the time of dhuhr. Now this sa'a does not relate to historical time, which in Arabic would be called probably either zaman. And then there's another Arabic word, dahar. And there's another one in the Qur'an used called asr. Zaman relates to time as a historical phenomena. Asr is more like an age or a period. And I can also use zaman for that as well. Sa'a does not have any of this. Dahar, if you look it up, it's an interesting word. In the Arabic language, there's a hadith that says, do not curse dahar, because dahar is God. And the hadith, if you look in the earliest Arabic dictionaries, dahar, according to the Arabs, was time stretched out. In other words, it's time-space. Right? And the idea here of sa'a is the actual moment in which the universe comes to an end. And it's called the hour, traditionally in the English literature, the hour. Which, I don't know, I think we have the idea in the Christian tradition of the last hour, right? Now there is also an idea of the last days, akhiru zaman. See, the last zaman, the last period of zaman. So there's an idea that the human being begins in time and is moving inexorably to an end of time. So Adam is the first man, and this is the beginning. Adam and Hawa. And the human condition is, from a prophetic point of view, it is prophets that show up throughout time. And what is important in the continuity and movement of time is the prophetic tradition itself. Right? This is the way the Qur'an is looking at it, is that there is a conflict going on. And this is why the historical stories in the Qur'an relate to prophets coming up against oppressors, coming up against tyrants. Pharaoh and Moses is the most repeated story in the Qur'an. Very important story. Lewis Mumford wrote a 2-volume work called The Myth of the Mega Machine. And in that book, his thesis is that basically what he calls them the axial prophets, these prophets that come around, I think about 1000 BC until Muhammad, which he considers the last of these axial prophets. And he said what these prophets do is that they're really shutting down the mega machine, right? In other words, the idea of this massive social project that relates to the world. The Pharaoh has his pyramids, and he's going to build them, and there's a lot of people that are going to die in the process. But they're going to carry those rocks, and they're going to carry it and do it all for the glory of the Pharaoh or the society or whatever. So Mumford said that he thought the Jewish tradition, the idea of the Sabbath, was a way of just shutting down the machine. Can't do it, sorry, not allowed to move anything. Right? It literally shuts it down. The idea of 5 prayers a day. A lot of Western people get very frustrated in some of these Muslim countries where everything stops. They're frustrated about a lot of things, right? But definitely the prayer is something that's very frustrating for many Western people that go there. They got business to do, and the guy says that we have to stop for prayer, right? So it's a problem. And Mumford saw it really as a way of shutting this thing down because he saw it as a very negative thing. Now, one of the things that Mumford says is that there is a movement, this historical movement towards the mega machine that in prior times, its nuts and bolts were human beings, right? The whole social project. And he thinks that Pharaoh and Musa is the best archetype of this phenomenon, that Moses comes in and is directly a challenge to the Pharaonic project. That the prophets literally challenge this idea that we are here for the glorification of a hierarchy, and at the top is this elite. And so the Qur'an uses this idea, they're called the mala, the people up, the high people, the elite, the elect of the world. There's a film, I can't remember the name, where there was conversation going on at a table, and one of the women's a sinologist, and there's a banker there, and the banker asks, how many people are there in China, according to your statistics? And she said, about 1 billion. And he said, no, they're not. There's only 12 people in China, and I know all of them, right? And the idea there was, here's a banker who, the way that he views the world is that the only significant people in China are his friends, who also are bankers. So the idea being is that there are, you get to a certain level in societies where people really do view. One of the wonderful things I read was, I think it was Linda Crawford, who's a model, who was up flying and the actual helicopter crashed. Cindy Crawford. Helicopter crashed, and they were like at Aspen or somewhere going up to ski the powder, and they were looking down, and somebody said to her, oh, look at all the little people. And right then the helicopter just went into this spin, right? So she got a very interesting, I thought that was a very interesting thing that she kind of picked it up or made the connection, that be careful about thinking how special you are, because we're all, right, in the hands or in the protecting care of God, right? So there are people that really do, like Helmsley, was that her name, who didn't pay, only little people pay taxes, right? Only little people pay taxes. There are people that really do think like that, right? And the Qur'an is really constantly bringing this up, and even goes into their inner discourse, which is fascinating. Literally, you can hear what they talk about when they're, because one of the things is he's telling his Mela, he said, listen, we got to get rid of this guy Moses because he's going to corrupt our people, right? So he sees, this is a corrupting element because he's going to teach him not to worship us, right? Not to say the Pharaoh's God, not to give me the authority that I'm entitled to. That is a disrupting element to the power elite when you have a teaching that is literally challenging the very foundations of that structure. And this is something very powerful in the Qur'an, and there are many examples of it.